Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the I Rock Knits podcast, chatting with Corrina. This is Corrina Ferguson. She is my tech editor, also a knitwear designer, and a co-working business owner. Right? I guess you, yeah, host. So we have lots to talk about today. Corrina's coming to us from Florida. And I have never met Karina in person. We have only ever done Zooms. And then she gets a lot of emails from me. So I would say that you are a pro in the industry. Like, you have been doing knitwear design and tech editing for a number of years, and you have a real skill set around that. So tell us a little bit about, like, when you started knitting, how you learned to knit, the early days.
So I actually haven't been knitting that long in the scheme of things. We moved to Florida about 20 years ago, and it was my first opportunity to be a stay-at-home mom. And my boys had the audacity to go to school. And so I was at home and I babysat my nephew a bit, and I was like, I need something. And there was a yarn store that was literally within walking distance of the first place that we lived here. And so I picked up knitting, and then I really just took to it. And then I started, teaching some classes at the yarn store, and then I started designing my own things, and it just kind of snowballed. And knitting was just that absolutely perfect raising two boys kind of career, because as a knitting designer, I would just sit at Boy Scouts, at football practices, at lacrosse, all of different things. And I would have my knitting with me. I remember there was one little boy in a family, and he would come and he would talk to me and he'd go, Miss Corrina, you're not looking. How do you do this without looking? Because, I'd be like watching, the practice or whatever. And so it was just very perfect to fit into the little nooks and crannies of our life. And then as the boys got older and more independent, I was able to do more things. When they were in high school, I had already written a couple of books, and I was a magazine editor for a while, for a knitting magazine. And it just kind of snowballed. And most of my best friends are knitters. All the people that I met here in Florida, it was either through the boys' school and church, or it was through, the people that I met knitting. So it just kind of,
Did you have any training to be an editor?
I
Like,
did. I didn't take training to be an editor, actually. I am very math inclined. I
I
actually
know
I
from the
actually
English teacher.
yes. Well, I wanted to be a math teacher, actually. And when the boys, that was one of the things that I pursued a little bit while the boys were younger, is I started going back to school to get my degree to be a math teacher, but that's like a whole nother story why I didn't do that. But I'm very math inclined, and I started working with designers that I was, working within the industry. And there was a lady that used to own a pattern distribution company. And so I would edit her stuff. And that was kind of my first experiences with it. And then I was like, oh, I kind of really like this. And I love designing, but there are a lot of times that I like editing more than designing, because I love being able to find out what's wrong and fix it, and the numbers. And I have so many spreadsheets in my life. It's
Yeah,
just
I just
insane.
wondered how you got into the magazine editor thing, because
The
that
Yeah, that was well, first off, it was definitely a lot of credit goes to networking, because I had people in the industry who knew that the job was available. One of them actually was considered for the job, and she wasn't interested. And she's like, "Well, what about Karina?" And I actually my other background before we moved here, I worked in the publishing industry. I worked
okay,
for a newspaper.
okay,
And so and I worked in advertising and IT in different departments, but I had a very good grasp on, the structures of
sure,
deadlines and all of that. So
sure. And what was the magazine?
it was creative knitting. It was a magazine that was published out of a small company in Indiana for years and years, and they still have, I think, one crochet publication that they still do. But I had done it for a couple of years, and that was really when, printed magazines were doing, and we've seen all of them kind of go away. So
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
So, was your first pattern the book that you wrote, the Warm
No,
Days?
no, no,
Oh, okay.
no.
I was online looking at your patterns, and you have 300 patterns on Ravelry,
I have a lot.
folks. So there's a ton out there to look at. And I was just scrolling back, and because there were so many, I couldn't figure out when you actually started. And the very like number 300 on the list was the book. What is it called? Warm
Warm
Days.
Days, Cool Knits.
Yes, yes.
And that's the book I
So
wrote with lighter weight yarns, kind of geared towards people living in Florida, where why did I wait? I lived in Ohio all my life, and then I moved to Florida and started knitting. So make that make sense. Yes.
so there. I did take a picture of it because I was like, oh, and that was like in 2015-ish.
Yes. 2015, I think the first one was published. My first patterns were published on Ravelry, I want to say 2008
Okay.
is when
Oh,
I started publishing.
when it first
Yeah.
started. Okay.
I was
Yeah, I was scrolling, but I wasn't clicking on everyone to see which one was first. You've been designing for a long time. So
yes.
what initially made you decide, okay, I want to design? Was it the yarn store experience? You were helping people with patterns
It
and
was
you kind of
definitely it was definitely the yarn store experience. Actually, the way that it kind of happened for initially wanting to design was I was teaching classes and we were using other people's patterns. And the yarn store that I worked at the time was doing it the correct way. But when I first learned how to knit, the knitting instructor that I had at one of the big box stores, she actually gave us photocopied pages out of somebody else's book. And I didn't realize at the time that that was not okay. Like I assumed she wrote the book, or that she had,
yeah,
she just
yeah.
photocopied some.
But I
But
also don't think that back in the day
it wasn't as big of a
we
deal.
were no one was aware. Like we weren't protecting copyright. We
So, but as
people
I
were
was
just
no, yeah, it wasn't
willy-nilly.
as big of a deal.
It should have been a deal, but we weren't making a deal,
No.
I think.
So
Yeah.
when I was teaching classes, I realized that I had more control over what I was teaching them if I wrote the pattern myself.
Got it.
And so that I think the patterns, I don't think I ever published them. The first things that I wrote up were dishcloths, because that was during the height of what are they called now? Modern daily knitting.
Yep.
When they did the
Yep.
dishcloth clubs and everybody
Yep.
was getting and so I wrote up a bunch of dishcloths and we did a dishcloth club at the thing and we had little lessons on it. And so that's kind of how it got started. But I realized that if I had my own patterns, then I could distribute them like I wanted to. I could teach what I wanted to. I could include the bits and pieces that I thought would be interesting for people to learn. So
You have a huge variety of patterns, though. You've knit and designed all the things,
lots
like
of
a
things.
lot
Yes.
of the things. But sweaters is a big one for you. You like,
I've done a lot of sweaters, but most of my sweaters have been for publications.
okay, yeah, because this is the one I knit. Your Morganite.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, because
I loved working with them. That was a nice.
I hadn't ever knit one of yours, and I have been working with you now for a while, and I was like, I really should support her by her pattern and knit
Thank
something. So yeah, I guess I was aware of how much you had knit, but this morning when I was looking, I was like, wow, like there's like 16 pages of designs or 12 pages of designs on Ravelry. I mean, it goes way back, and
It's a
a
lot.
lot of your designs are still really relevant.
I think a lot of them are. One of the things that I find, though, from my sweaters in particular, is that when I was designing sweaters for publications a lot in the past, they wanted everything very fitted, very feminine,
Oh,
and I don't, I'm not designing sweaters that way anymore. Like I have two sweaters planned right now, and neither of them have anything close to negative ease. They're made to be comfortable and loose and light. And
yeah, I can see that. But certainly with those more fitted sweaters, you could just upsize.
yes,
And
yes,
if you wanted a different fit, you could, in some not all would do that, but some things would just upsize well in a bigger size and be more
Right.
loose, because yeah, you've got to, and you do, I think I read in one of your interviews that you like to do lace. Like lace is
Oh, I love lace.
yeah. And see, I'm not a, I mean, I don't mind lace, but I don't design in lace. And one of the other things that you said, that you love a good advanced beginner. And I think that's when I hit it off with you too, is when we were interviewing each other to get
Mhm.
started. Um, I had said that I had had two different tech editors and had a lot of issues with my patterns going out into the world with small errors in them or things not being caught. And it's partly, and I think I was very upfront about the fact, is that I am not trained in pattern writing and numbers are not my thing. And I don't do Excel well. I don't do Excel hardly at all for my patterns. So I do it all on paper. So I'll have 30 sheets of paper out in front of me with the numbers and the increases and the sizes. And I am like, it's old school. And I wish that I would have learned program or better math. And so I just really struggled with a lot the tech editors that I was working with, because I really needed a little more hand holding. I needed a little more investment from my tech editor, and I was willing to pay for that. But you didn't shy away. You weren't like, "Ooh, okay," like,
No.
where's she coming from? Because I had designed quite a few things, but I always have to work really hard through. Because I'm an English teacher, but also because I am a verbal volcano. I am
That's
just a
funny too.
chatty Cathy, and things just, and so my patterns tend to be wordy and long and have lots of notes, and I that's just the way I think, and that's not always the way knitter wants your stuff. But because I was teaching beginners, and it went over into advanced beginners wanting things that I could design for them. And so then my most popular pattern became this little, cowl that was just basically a sampler for them that had some stitch patterns in it. And I called it the Knitting at the Library cowl. Who knew that thousands of knitters across the country knit at the library? And so they saw the title and and it's
Oh,
supposed
nice.
to look like books on the shelf. And I've shown it on the podcast, but it was those advanced beginner patterns that kind of launched me into, I know that they can't figure out where they're at in the pattern if they come out a few days back, a few weeks or days later. They don't know where,
Mhm.
like, checklist patterns became the thing that I sold, because people would say, I love that you write out every row. I have other more advanced knitters that would be like, oh my God, just tell me what to do, right? Like, so you were all in on that. And you also do all of my graphic layout for me. I just want everybody to know, because I've talked about you, like I sent it to my tech editor and she's doing my layout right now, but it's nice to put a face with a picture. And I do pay Corrina for an hourly wage, and it costs me more to have her do more of the work. But I'm not as capable of seeing what needs to be done. And because of her editing experience, also with magazines where you have to like
Mhm.
hone down, my things come back pretty marked up, which is great, because I'm like, accept, 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 because I look at it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a much better way. And it has made me a better pattern writer. It's made me a little better at doing some of it, but I still struggle a little bit. So when you started tech editing, were you tech editing mostly for friends at first? Like, or because you would have known designers in the industry, right?
Yeah, I had a good number of people that I knew in the industry. And so I started out tech editing for people that I knew personally. Like there used to be trade shows and we would all go in person and get to know each other and, all of that. Um, and then it kind of expanded to, and I think it's a lot in the knitting world. It's very much, you know, who do you know kind of a thing. And I
Mhm.
don't mean that to sound like an old boys club, but it's kind of like, oh, do you want to do edits for this company? They're sending me a bunch of edits, but I'm writing a book in October. Can I put your name in? And so it definitely was very word of mouth. And it's one of those things. Right now, I'm in a little bit of a lull, because a lot of designers had tons and tons of patterns over the summer. There were days when I looked at my board and I had like 30 things in process. And
So
but
we all do, because fall is
this is the
publication
season.
time, right? We're
Fall is
all
the
like,
season.
the yarn companies want their stuff in September, October, right?
Yep.
So you
But
were swamped.
so I was swamped. But the thing is I think I have an ad that runs on Ravelry that costs me about $1 a month, but I don't advertise. Um, I just people come and it was interesting. I think you're one of the few people that you sat and we talked before we did it, which I probably should do more because it would save me from having to fire clients. And I don't like to fire clients, but sometimes, there's just it's not going to work out the way that they want to do things. And that's one of the things that I love about working with you is the fact that you're teachable, and the fact that you look and you're like, oh, if we and there are times that I say, well, if we do it this way, and you're like, no, my people like it that way, and that is good, and it's great to know your people. But there's some people where you say, you need a little shaping here, and they're like, well, I don't want to, blah blah blah, and it's like, okay, well then I'm going to see their boobies because there's nothing there to cover that, and it's like, and it's just fascinating to me how many people will come and want to pay you and then completely ignore your advice. And it's like, okay. So I've made a habit of keeping patterns. And so that way, if someone comes back and says, well, this doesn't work. And I'm like, well, yeah, I told you that that wasn't going to work. So
Yep.
we
Yeah.
can revisit it and we can fix it. But that's part of why I love working with you, is because we go back and forth and we figure out what's going to work, but you're also open to suggestions. And
Oh, and I think I was pretty upfront about that from the beginning,
oh
right?
yeah.
Is that I had this dream for so many years to do this, because I love my 3 ring notebook that is so full of ideas, right? Like I
Mm.
have been collecting for years, and I said it for a long time. I want to be a knitwear designer. And I was trained as a teacher. So I was teaching. I had been teaching since I lived in Virginia in 2001 to 2006. Felting. It was the height of the felting craze. And
Yes.
I traveled to Charlottesville and Williamsburg and Richmond because it was all felting. And I loved teaching, but I also wanted to put my ideas down on paper and didn't feel like I had a skill set around that. And I think that's why I went through several tech editors, because I didn't have a fit. And I wasn't upfront about the fact that this wasn't just going to be always just checking my numbers, just going through and checking my numbers, and that I was very experienced in writing the pattern, and it would all be very, that I knew it wouldn't. And so I had gotten better at that, but we do a lot of back and forth, a lot.
No, and I think that's the way that it needs to be, because tech editing is definitely a relationship. It's not a I send it back. I mean, there's certain things you'll get, like somebody will send, you send me a hat and I'm like, okay, this looks good. We need to make
Yeah.
this a little longer, and it's done.
Yeah.
But anything more complex, there's going to be back and forth and discussions, um but yeah, I like working with people that, and I want to have a dialogue where you're like, there's one lady that I work with that I was like, hey, our sleeve cap isn't going to work on this. And she was like, no, actually, if you check this book, this and this. And I'm like, well, if you're telling me to check her book, then I'm wrong. So I learned something new this past month. Did you know that when you're doing color work, that the color work stitches get taller? Like the gauge might be 1824. So that's a normal gauge, 18 stitches in 24 rows. You put that in color work and it might be 18 stitches in 20 rows, because the stitches get taller because of the floats. I did not know that. I don't know how I never learned that 20 years.
Is that why someone would go up in needle size to try to make it wider to shorten it. Because
I
if you
don't,
made something wider, it would shrink it. And sometimes people's color work is tight.
it's
So they go
tight,
up in needle size to kind of balance that out. But I
but
wonder
that
if
would
that,
make it was just one of those things that I didn't know because I was working on something and I couldn't reconcile. And so I had sent something back to the publication and then I started doing some research on it and I'm like, oh. And then the reason that they gave for it. And I was just like one of those things where I was like, okay, I learned something new this month because I never
I
knew that.
feel like though that is the nature of the beast of knitting,
Yes,
is that we can never stop learning if we want, right? Like
right.
you can continue to step forward and step forward and step forward into new techniques, new understanding, new fit, and I hate saying to people, you just have to knit a few sweaters to get what you want. You have to knit a couple pairs of socks before you'll get the fit you want, because they're like, can I just knit the first pair and have them fit? Well, sometimes,
Sometimes.
but sometimes you just have to figure out your own method, your own gauge, your own like fit that you like. Like
Right.
just because I say this works for me in this fit and this, it doesn't mean that it would work for everyone. So, but you did say in an interview that you like advanced beginners because they're eager, you know?
Yeah, I always like to call them adventurous beginners. I like the beginners who are willing to learn things, are ready to learn something new. And I think that's part of the reason I've crocheted since I was a child. My stepmother taught me to crochet when I was very young, and I've had crocheted all my life. And then I learned to knit when we moved here. But I think part of the reason that I progressed so quickly in the knitting and was, designing within a few years was the fact of the matter was, well, first off, knitted objects aren't very practical in Florida. So I didn't need to knit 20 hats, but I would knit one hat and I would learn how to knit cables on that hat. And then I would knit a purse and it would have Farrell stranding in it. And so every time I did a project in the beginning, the project had to have something new in it. It had to have something that I'd never done in knitting before. And so it was very much, the adventurous thing. And that's like I said, my favorite knitter is an adventurous beginner because first off, they don't know that they can't do it, which they can. And second off, they're just willing to try things. And and a lot of when you have that spirit, it's like, oh, you're gonna have to rip out. And yeah, you're gonna have to rip out. I've been designing for 15 plus years. I've got 300 and some things under my belt, and I ripped out an entire shawl the other day. So it just,
The whole month of June, I ripped back yokes on a sweater because it just wasn't what I wanted. But absolutely, I
yeah.
I agree. I think we're really similar in that way. I've been podcasting now for 5 years, and I don't know how many times I have said the only reason that I knit a new project is because it has something in it that intrigues me.
Hmm.
Like I want, and I think that's why the design piece also came around, is that I wanted to implement some things that I learned or something different, because I am all about bold and color, and
Hmm.
that is not everyone's aesthetic. But I also don't see it a lot because somewhere in the world, knitwear designers and people were told, blue and purple are the colors that sell, and neutrals are great, and so there's just a lot of that out there. And sometimes you go into a yarn store and that's really what's featured as well, are a lot of neutrals, and not that they don't have the brights, but I'm just a screaming yellow zonker, right? Like I love all color in everything. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of your favorite knits of all time, or some of your favorite designs, or I can put pictures in after the fact, or I can just
Okay.
put the titles down. But do you have some things that we can share, some ideas, some?
Well, I will say that Morganite, the one that you knit, is one of my favorites. If I redid it, I mean, as you become more experienced, there's things you would do differently. But part of the reason that that is one of my favorite things is the photography that they did.
It was Pom Pom Quarterly,
Pom
issue
Pom.
6,
It was Pom
August
Pom.
of 2013. So you were like
Yeah.
early on in the Pom Pom, right?
Yes. And they used this model, this beautiful, beautiful woman whose name is if I remember correctly, her name is Cleopatra. And I hope that's not wrong, but I like went and followed her on Instagram because I was just obsessed. I'm like, you made my stuff look so beautiful. It was just like she was so, and it's that rich orange. I think it's a Malabrigo color, and and she's just glowing. And I'm like, yep, that's better than any photography I could ever do. And
Yeah,
but
they're kind of known for their
oh yeah, yeah.
beautiful images.
And I felt the same way about my book. The first book that I did, I had a photographer from Interweave that just did just beautiful things. But for me now, and I will tell you this, I picked the totally wrong career as a knit designer. I am the slowest knitter you will ever meet. Everything takes me forever. Oh yeah, I love that yoke. Actually, my mom has that sweater now because she still lives in Ohio, and fall leaf colors, like fall foliage, is like her favorite colors. And so that sweater lives with her. It's too small for me anyways because she's tiny. But
Just so everyone knows, it is DK weight, 20 stitches and 26 rows on a size 7. The sizes go from 32 to 48, and the suggested yarn is Madelinetosh DK.
yes.
Okay.
Oh, I thought that was
Just
Madeline.
so
I guess it
people
is
know.
Madelinetosh. But yeah, but I'm a really slow knitter. And so actually my favorite projects are faster things. I've become completely obsessed, and they just keep coming out of me, is little cowls that have the triangle in the front. I just keep
You
knitting.
haven't you have a new one out, don't you?
I had a recent one that I put out, and that was the first time I used, I don't know how to say it. I'm horrible with accenty stuff. La
I'll
Bien,
tell you. La Bien-Ami,
La Bien-Ami.
Merino DK, 20 stitches, 28 rows on a US 5. Now I'll put it back up.
That yarn is butter. That yarn is, it's just one of those yarns where it was like, yeah. So, but I love those little cowls. I don't wear them very often because Florida, we get, 5 sweater days a year if we're lucky. But yeah, so, and
But I do think they're really wearable for everyone else, right? Like
oh yeah, absolutely. I think they're
I'm going
very
to show.
wearable. And it's one of those things, the majority of the ones that I do that are the cowls with the triangle, it's one skein of yarn because everybody has those one precious skein that they picked up at, the Fiber Fest or the yarn store, and they don't know what to do with it. And so that's part of the other reason that I really love the little cowlettes.
Yeah.
Um,
And that one came out in May. So it's
yes,
it's new
it's
too.
new. And it's sad because I have piles of things that I haven't published yet, and I just don't get around to it because I'm busy with other things.
Because you're doing all these other things
Yeah.
for people.
So, but yeah, it is. Well, and also when the boys were in high school, the girls clamored to model for me.
Oh.
And so I had like this endless supply of super adorable girls. Like all of my photography for my second book were girls that went to the boys' schools.
And what was the
And
second book?
second are top-down sweaters.
Let me look.
That one,
Right here, top down knit sweaters.
yes.
Because
And
it's at the
then
bottom of your
yeah, and that one
16 versatile
actually,
styles featuring texture, lace, cables, and color work. Okay. So that's that one.
yes.
I know
And
I have
that
a little glare. I'm trying to not have glare here.
no, you're fine. And that one actually was weird because it took a really, really long time for it to come out. The publishing company that I worked with, it went under and then it got bought out and then it got bought again, and it was like a whole thing. But so that one I ended up doing my own photography for, and I'm not nearly as good as the other people. But the girls would just, so now I don't have models anymore. My favorite model that I usually use, she's married now and she's, busy. And I mean, if I texted her right now, she would meet me at the park and we would take pictures. But
We have so much. The same thing happened to me. I had a gal, she modeled for me in my first book, Minnesota 52. And then now she's married and has her second child, right?
yeah,
She modeled, the baby modeled my Christina hat. And then now we have another child. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not calling her, right? She's
right.
working, 2 babies,
Yeah.
beautiful gal. I loved having her. Joanna, she's a face of a lot of my designs because I used her exclusively to kind of have that recognition,
I think
right?
it helps. I think it helps.
Well, when you're starting, it certainly does, right?
No, I used the same girl for quite a number of years. But yeah, I definitely need to like get with her. And there's so many things that I have that are like blocked. I have things that are photographed that still need to be released, and I
I
just
will
don't get
say,
around to it.
because this just came in the mail, and this has nothing to do with this, but Gail Zucker is having a collaborative photo shoot September 15th. You can
Oh,
send her all your stuff all
oh,
in one go.
nice.
And
I know some
she
people that have done, yeah.
yeah. And so I was looking at that because I have several things. I'm going to go back here. At the bottom of a designer's page is all the things that they have published in. That's
Okay.
impressive, Karina. That's impressive. Look at all those
Yeah.
different books and things. So many. A Year of Stripes,
That one
Knitting
was fun.
Wizardry, perfectly placed striped Yellowstone shawls. Did you do a design for? Yeah, you must have.
Well, that was the name of a yarn, actually.
Oh, okay.
It was called Yellowstone, and it was from Stitch Sprouts. And so I did a
Oh, okay.
collection with all the colors that she had in the Yellowstone yarn. So,
Got it. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot to look at, you guys. A lot. Do you have some other design names that we could share?
the one of my favorites, and I don't even remember when it was published, 2009 probably. I think it's pronounced Gaenor. I found it, I used to go like to baby name finders and stuff to find names, but it's Gaenor, and it's a sideways shawl, and you can use any yarn with it. And it's just one of those things that I'm super, super proud of. And that was the thing that I published that made me think that I could have a career doing knit design. And those are actually recent photographs. My initial photographs of that were not that cute. That's the girl that's married now that does modeling for me. But it's just one of those things where it was like so many people bought that at the time. And that was at the time when you just had to drop something on Ravelry and everybody would buy it. And I'm just so proud of that. And
Fingering weight, one skein,
yeah,
US size 7 needle,
yep.
76 inches long and 24 deep, just for people to kind
Yeah,
of
and
get
it's
an idea.
bigger.
They can go over and look at it.
But it's one of those things that because of the way that it's written, you just stop when half of your yarn is gone. And then you can, which I love that kind of a thing. I love the kind of a thing where you can play with that. Like you could do that in any yarn as long as you like the way the fabric drapes.
Yep.
So
And then use up most of your skein.
exactly. You know what else I really love? I love the fangirl hat. And I designed that. The boys were still in primary school, and I was designing presents for the teachers. And one of the teachers was a Florida Gators fan. So we used Florida Gators colors. And so, but it's one of those ones where I loved the idea that you could pick any colors that are like your two favorites.
Yep.
And yeah. And you could pick any colors that are your two favorites and make like a fandom hat. Um, I
Yeah.
just don't have my head,
No, that's great because like a lot of people do this time of year too are starting to go to high school football games, high school
Mhm.
soccer games, college football games. Let's talk briefly about your co-working hosting.
Yes,
Kind of newer,
it's kind of newer.
newer business.
So I
I
have,
know I know nothing really about co-working and what it is. I looked it up and I read your stuff on your website and I was like, oh, how does this work?
so basically my brain is mean and dumb, and I get distracted very easily, and I have trouble staying focused. And of course, when I'm doing tech editing, it helps because I have timers going and I can't float off like a butterfly and do something else. But one of the things that I found as I've been doing different things in my business that really helps me is the concept of body doubling, which I've always done, but I never knew what it was called. I remember when we had lived here and we were moving to our second home here, I called my friend and I said, "Can you come over and just sit in my living room while I pack the boxes? I don't need you to help pack the boxes. I know you've got a toddler. You can bring, the baby, and I just need someone in the room so that." And so it's that concept that when there's someone else in the room. And of course, with COVID and everything, and the way different things were, what I used to do all the time is I would go to Starbucks.
Yeah.
And so just having people around helped me get work done. But also it's very expensive because you buy coffee and lemon loaf and all the good things, and you tip the kids. But so I found virtual co-working, which is run over Zoom, and I got some of my friends to help me test it. And so I have set up a membership. So you can pay a monthly fee, and I run about 60, well, it's a minimum of 60 hours a month. Normally we do, 4 hours a day. We do a morning session and an afternoon session, depending on where you are. Like one of the ladies is in Norway and she only comes for the morning sessions. But we get together, we tell everybody what we're working on, and we set timers. We do 25 minutes and then we check in again. And we do that over the course of the 2 hours. And it's one of those things where if you were in your phone and you were publishing your own reel and then you got lost in everybody else's reels, then the timer goes off and there's people looking at me and I'm like, okay, how are we doing? And so it's just a structured workday and it's done virtually. And initially it was only like knitting and yarn people because that's who I know. But we've started getting some people that do wedding stuff now. So but basically we just come in and it kind of gives me structure to my workday. My husband works at home as well. So I structured it around his workday. We work from 10 to noon, and then I have a long lunch break so that if we want to go out, we can. And then we work from 2:30 to 4:30. And then at 4:30, I'm done and I pretend I know what I'm making for dinner. But most days I don't know what I'm making for dinner, but So it just is kind of a structure thing. So the combination of the timers and the body doubling helps me get things done. And a lot of people who are in our industry have those kinds of creative brains that want to go all the places and not stay on task. And so it's just a way to stay on task. And it's done wonders for me. And it definitely isn't for everybody. I remember one of my friends that I'm close with, I reached out to her and I'm like, hey, we're going to do this thing. Do you want to try it out with us? When we were just like trying to figure it out. She goes, oh my God, that would be the worst thing ever. I would hate that. And she wasn't saying it like to denigrate me
No.
or anything, but it was like, there are some people that it works for, and there are other people where it's like, oh, I don't. And for me, it works. And so for the other people that have joined up, it works. And people kind of come and go as they need the time. And it's like a little mini community of people. And I'm hoping to grow it more. But right now, it just gives me a structure to get through things.
So it really doesn't matter what you're working on
No.
to you.
Mm-mm.
But if you go bigger, then how would everybody check in? Would you have another group going and another timer?
So right now, we haven't had like huge groups of people in the rooms at the
Right.
same time.
Right.
And on a day when everybody's staying on task, we can get through everybody checking in like a minute. And I allow 5 minutes for it. So I know that I can grow quite a
Oh,
bit before we need to stop checking in verbally. But the plan is when it's too big, we will either check in via chat or
oh, sure.
or
Yeah.
we will do breakout rooms. But right now it's a small enough group that we can almost always get through it in like the first 5 minutes. Right now we have one of our co-working friends has moved across the world, and so with her husband, and so she's getting her dogs on Saturday finally after weeks and weeks of all of the stuff. And so we did talk a lot about dogs today. But so that got us a little outside. But normally everybody's very much, I'm still working on content. I had to go and make coffee because I'm not awake yet. I had to, and sometimes, honestly, for me, a lot of times, especially midweek, I will clean my desk and I will be, okay, this 25 minutes, I am cleaning my desk and I'll take my camera down off of my thing and let them see, it's such a mess right now, but it is Friday, so I can clean it for the weekend.
Right.
But
But
yeah.
I like my husband works from home as well, but he works upstairs in a little office space, and I work on the main floor. And he comes down often during the day, and we'll have lunch, and he will come to the door and just stand there or interrupt because I'm not in meetings or I'm not on Zoom or whatever. I'm just working on patterns or whatever. In the 5 years, I guess it's been 4 years since he started working from home, I've ever gone upstairs twice ever because, someone came to the door for him or there was a phone call, right? Like an important, like I don't interrupt him. And I finally had to have that conversation like, excuse me, but you're interrupting my workday. But because I'm a creative, it
Yep.
doesn't feel like I have a work day because I work until all hours of the night and then I sleep in sometimes in the morning because I'm such a night owl.
You
And,
are a night
so I said,
owl.
you can't just come to the door because you're interrupting my flow, my work. But for him, the co-working thing is meetings every,
Mhm.
right? Like for him, what you do is literally he's on Zoom having a meeting with 6 people, and then the next hour having a meeting with 6 people, which is really co-working, right? They're
Yeah.
checking in, they're doing the work that needs to be done or having the talk, but that's how his day is, which is why I would never go up and walk in because there could be 30 people with the cameras. I come walking in my pajamas, right? Like but for
Yeah.
him, he sees me as being just far more unstructured, unscheduled, whatever. And I could shut the door and put a sign on it and say, but there are times when it's perfectly fine for him to just, and I'm with the dog, and you have a new puppy, a
She
new
we've
newer
had her
dog,
now. Yeah, we've had her for a year and
right?
a half now, but she's doing better, but she's a lot. She is not my dog. She was supposed to be my dog, but she is my husband's dog. So, I take care of her some during the day, but he's actually moved his office downstairs, so he takes care of her. But we've had the same kind of problems. So I'm in what's technically considered our formal our formal living room. We have a dining room. So, which we're not formal people at all, but whatever. So I hung up curtains and there
Yeah,
is
this is my dining room, Karina.
is it? So this is my office, but
It's
I've
where I
hung up,
podcast, but I don't have a formal dining room either. I mean, I have a hutch in it, so it's a dining room on the
right?
schematic,
No,
whatever.
but I put up curtains and I also have a neon sign. If you look on, I think I have it on my Instagram somewhere, but I have a neon sign that says on the air. And so if you see the sign, if the curtains are closed and the sign is on, you're not supposed to like stand in the kitchen and ask me where the peanut butter is, you know, but it still happens. But so yeah, I have a neon sign and I have curtains and it's getting better, but we've had a lot of the same struggles because he's very much, he just he works for a company. He works for a big company. He has structured meetings and conference calls and a work day.
Yep.
Whereas, and that's part of the reason that I started the co-working was because I needed to have certain hours that I was actually working on things because it's easy for me. I'm an early person. You send me emails and I answer you 4 hours later because you send them at 2 and I answer you at 6.
I know, but
But
it works for us.
it works. But
Yeah, I
I
told you,
totally
I'm up till I have to make myself go to bed, and my husband is up at 5:30 running. And I didn't start this life until COVID. I got up with everyone else because, and
right.
I did not function as well. I really learned that if I can sleep after 8:30 in the morning, my day functions so much better and I get a second wind. Last night I was like, you have to go to bed. You have to. I have an alarm on my phone that says literally go to bed because otherwise I can knit and take notes and knit and get on the computer till all hours, and it's different for you. So, co-working, are you then telling yourself that you have to be home in your office for those 10 to 12 and 2 to
Mhm.
4:30 every day?
Pretty much. We take some time off here and there, but
Yeah,
and I guarantee like a minimum number of hours for the
yeah,
people that are
yeah,
paying members. But Monday through Thursday, I am at my desk on those hours every day. We do Friday mornings, I do a free session where if you want to come and try it out, people can come and try it out. So like Friday mornings, I don't do it every Friday morning, but most
yeah,
Friday mornings I do the
yeah.
free session. And so, but yeah, it because I can get up at 6 and do a million things, but not actually get any work done. And then it's lunchtime.
Right.
Whereas
Yep.
if I get up at 6 and I walk on the treadmill and I do this and I go through all the things and I do all my morning routine things, no matter what, there's going to be alarms that are going to start going off that say, did you post in the Facebook group? Did you, it's 9:45. You need to be ready for co-working. Is your hair still in a towel? Which sometimes it is, but you know, but
Yeah.
it just that's
Well, it
my
wouldn't really matter, right? If you're working from home and you're okay with being on Zoom.
it doesn't bother me. I've
No,
gotten
right.
very used to seeing my face on Zoom and sitting with other people, and people will apologize for things and I'm like, my hair's still wet, or I just had food fall out of my mouth onto my desk. Well, you're fine.
So you run this through Craft Star Studio,
Yes.
or is
Well,
that
no, it's yes. I mean, I the Craft Star Studios is just the brand name for my patterns and my tech editing work. I've got the co-working set up under a different name because I'm trying to expand beyond yarn people.
yep.
So it's actually called Acorn Co-working. And so it's, you're planting those little seeds and growing those big things, but you just got to do the little things at one at a time. And but it's
So that's
all
where someone would go, because I do have some people that are designers or that are
yeah.
knitting people or that work from home that might be interested. So I want to make sure that people know where they can find you. So Craft Star Studio would be your website,
Mhm.
and then Acorn Co-working would
If
be
they go to actually, if they go to CorrinaFerguson.com, that's where I
okay.
keep all of the
Got
co-working.
it. Okay.
So
And then
CorrinaFerguson.com.
you mentioned Facebook. So do you run a business part on Facebook too, or no?
Well, I have two things on Facebook. We have a kind of a check-in thing that we keep going for the co-working people. What's your goal for the week? What are you working on for the week? That kind of thing. But I also am trying to have a group, and it's a small group. I think there's only like 40 people in it, but it's creative business owners. And so those are people that, when you have a creative business, it's different than other it's just
Yep.
different. There's all kinds of online businesses and different things, but having a business that's in the craft world or the creative world is just different. There's different
Yep.
rules, there's different things. And so I've got this creative business growth group, and like people will come in and be like, have a question about do I need a contract for this? And trying to encourage those conversations. So that's one of the things that I do in the Facebook, and that's just a free group. Um, but it basically just having people to bounce off that kind of know where you're coming from. Because, I've got a bunch of business groups that I'm in, and if I come in and I'm talking about yarn, I actually had somebody just this week. I'm working on a tech editing course to teach people to be tech editors. And I'm in a business group to get this course together. And a guy comes in and he goes, "You can't call it tech editors because people will think it's something else. You need to call it pattern editors." And I'm like, thanks. But if I call it pattern editors, the people in my industry will think I'm talking about something else. We call it tech editors. Knitting is technical writing. I understand that there are tech editors for nuclear warheads and this and that and this and that, but this is what we call it in our industry. Have a nice day. It was just, it was like really, really irked me because I was like, oh,
He felt the need to
he felt the need
mansplain.
to correct me. And I kind of understand it, but it's also somebody in the yarn industry. If I tell them that I'm a tech editor, they know exactly what I do.
Yep.
They might not know if I do it in knitting or crochet, because I don't really do it for crochet
Right.
very much because I'm not as versed in those patterns, but they will know what that is. If I call myself a pattern editor, they're not going to know what I'm talking about. And so it was just interesting because it was just that kind of reconfirmation that people outside of the craft world and outside of the yarn world, they don't understand the phrases and the terminology and the challenges and the sometimes very, I baked you a pie to pay you for this kind of mentality that we're coming from. That's not a good way to say that, but
No, but
you know what I'm talking about.
a $7 knitting pattern,
Right. It's just
right?
it's different, and so people outside of the industry don't understand. So I'm trying to build a community where it's the people that get it, and and so I post in there a few times a week and encourage people. And we're getting a little bit of traction, but it's one of those things I couldn't find what I wanted, so I'm trying to build it. So it's the same with the co-working. I looked at some other co-working options because there are other co-working memberships out there. There's quite a few. And the majority of them are very, very tech bro. They're very dude, and it just was not my vibe. And I'm like, I want to work with people who, if I say that I'm knitting, they're not going to be like, you're what?
I
Because
know.
I'm
Yeah.
working, I'm knitting, and
Yeah.
so that's a whole, I could rant on that stuff for a whole year. So I should
Yeah.
shush. So
Yeah, no, I think, we are having a little bit more of a business talk today, but I think that it's interesting to people who haven't ever been in this industry. It needs to become more value based, for that there is definitely a value of a good knitting pattern. There's
right.
a value in a good tech editor. There's,
Yes.
that's what people want to purchase, and then they get frustrated when they buy a free pattern on Ravelry and it doesn't work out for them, right?
Yeah.
And then you say, well, I don't know that you should have taken a free pattern for that, because it's probably not tech edited, probably
Right.
hasn't been test knit, and but then they complain that you want to put your pattern up to $8 or $9, and you're like,
Yeah.
but it's costing me several $100s to get there. And I have harped on this, so my people have definitely heard it. But
Yeah. There's
and I
there's a
do
lot of
think that they have found a little bit of a boost in the sewing industry, where patterns are now much more. And you're
hmm
getting, but you're getting this physical piece, that you're printing out on. I don't even know, because I'm not a sewer, but they're printing
yeah.
out these big, and they're cutting and and doing all that. But it's similar to those old ones that we used to get in the little packets, but
hmm
they're willing to pay more for the better quality of the pattern. And I think that that's where we need to go to, with just
It's the same.
honoring people's hard work.
It's the same for cross stitch. Cross stitch patterns are so much more expensive than knitting patterns.
Okay.
And it's fascinating to me that you talk about, because I'm at a $7 price point and I'm working on moving things to $8, and I need to get things so that they're available other than Ravelry, not just on Ravelry, because
Yep.
that's not the end all be all that it used to be.
Yep.
And so going from $7 to $8, I'm feeling resistance in myself, because it's like, oh, is it? And then you're like, but I spent this many hours knitting it and this many hours doing this and this, and I
But
spent
how many years have you been selling them for $7?
not that many. Well, I guess
A few.
it's been a while. It's been a while.
You
It's
know, like
definitely been a while. But
since
you
COVID, everything's gone up, right? Like I'm like,
right?
my pattern
Well,
needs
and
to
it's like
go to
the cross stitch
$8.
though. Cross stitch are like, I want to say the last cross stitch pattern I bought was 18.
Oh wow.
And there's no sizing involved. It's literally a chart that tells you where to put the different colors. And
Yeah.
I'm not devaluing their work, because I couldn't design the stuff. It's beautiful and I want to stitch it and all of that. But I think that knitting needs to come to that point where things are more valued. It's fascinating to me, the different attitudes around all of it. So
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I definitely agree. Talk just briefly about what goes in for you to tech editing a pattern. Like what is just a little bit of the process? I've never had a tech editor on. I think people kind of know, but I also have some people who are newer knitters that wouldn't know what a tech editor does, or how, briefly what the process might look like.
so for me, I think my process is very similar to a lot of people's. One of the things that I do, the first thing that I do when I get a tech edit is I print it. And I would like to say that I love you that you have page numbers on your patterns, because a lot of designers don't put page numbers. And the first thing I have to do is go put page numbers, because it's going to be all over my desk. But I print it, and then I set up a spreadsheet, and I'm going through and I'm checking everything. You're telling me that you're using this yarn. Does that yarn exist in that color? Does it, blah, 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 blah. Is that the correct yardage? Is that, is that the right thing? And I'm going through, and like anytime you have links in your pattern, I click through every single link to make sure that all of the links work. I go through and I check all of the math to make sure that all of the
A big one for me is my inches and centimeters.
it is,
I
but it
always, now I do more of a template, but there's a lot of times where Karina has to go in and put in all my centimeters or my
It's okay.
millimeters because I
But
forgot.
no, but it helps to have it for different audiences.
Oh,
But I
it's
definitely think an inch.
mandatory. Like you need to
Yeah,
have
it
it.
is. It is. But I go through and I check all of the math. And then when it comes to more complex things, like for a hat, we had one hat recently where I was like, ooh, we got too short on this hat. And you're like, oh yeah, the test knitter's too short on the hat. And we made the hat longer and it was fine. But when it comes to sweaters and stuff, are the arms that fit this bust size going to fit a human? Is this going to be, wearable? Is it going to make the object as the object is pictured? And so it's just going through all those things step by step. I like to do it printed because what I do is I'm doing the spreadsheet and I'm checking things on the printed pattern and I mark up the pattern. And then when I go back to your electronic pattern and put all the changes in, then I'm double checking myself. And not saying I don't do snafus because we know I do, but it's a helpful double check. But it's really just going through everything, making sure that everything that's said in it is correct, making sure it makes the thing that you say it's going to make, making sure that the yarn amounts are correct. A lot of people are not very good at estimating yardages, for example, for
Yes.
sweaters. And it's difficult because it used to be like the Morganite sweater only goes to like a 48-inch bust because that's what we used to do. Now we're going to 72-inch busts sometimes on
Right.
things. And I think it's great. I'm a plus size woman. We want to have a wide range of sizes, but it also brings challenges. Is there enough yarn for this size? And so it's going through and doing all of those things. And so much of it is spreadsheet based. And it always, when you guys do it on paper, I'm like, I can't even wrap my head around being able to do it. I mean, I could, but
No, it's way slow. I mean, it's very slow. I think the more we put in the pattern, the more complicated those notes and editing becomes, which also then makes it easier to have issues, right? Like
yeah,
when you
absolutely.
have a 12 size pattern, that is chock full. Back in the day, we were not doing that many,
It's
right?
like 5.
And so people look at your pattern, I think, and they're like, well, I only need one size and I'm not going to do 12 patterns. Like I'm not
No,
going to make 12 patterns. I just like that. The ownership of that would be, so the investment is they're all in one. And then you
right.
get right now I'm getting this. This is a little hard to follow, Cori, because there are so many sizes that I'm struggling where to go next for my size. And I get
Yeah,
that, right? Because there's so many sizes in our new patterns when they're wanting us to go up to 60 and now 70-inch bust lines, which back in the day we were going maybe to 50, and there were much fewer sizes and we weren't always going down to a 32. And so I think in some respects the tin can knits gals who do baby to adult male 6XL screwed us all. Right? Like I love I love that they did it and that every pattern has all those sizes. But it's difficult. It's
a
a
lot.
lot to manhandle into. And now the patterns are getting longer and longer. So you're hearing that too, right? You're like, oh my gosh, it's 12 pages. And I'm like, well, and that's why I think these companies, Knitrino and Tin Can Knits, are doing apps. And I think that's the wave of the future, is where you go in and you put in the size you need and it takes out all the extraneous stuff. And so
Yes.
you can use the app to just do your size. I can't develop an app for that. I'm going to have to download and I think that that's where Ravelry should head, is if they wanted to make that jump for people, is to develop an app where you'd buy the pattern, it would download into the Ravelry app and it would take out, and you would just have in the pattern the size that, that like these two other companies are now doing, but that it took them years with an app
Yeah.
developer
I need to
to.
look into those because that's interesting to me.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah.
just knit one out of the Tin Can Knits app, and all you have to do is put in, if you're making the long sleeved, long body crew v-neck, and then size 44, and the whole pattern comes up for just the numbers for the 44.
Interesting. That's
And
fascinating.
then
That's awesome.
each, yeah, and Neutrino is doing some of that, and I think that maybe oh, what was the first app that came out? They have a couple of my patterns.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. They have some of mine too.
People will know what I'm talking about. I don't know, like you can highlight where you're at in the pattern. I think that's kind of where we're headed with these patterns that are going to be significantly bigger material, to print, and we're getting away from printing stuff or whatever. And you could just narrow it right down to that. Oh, we've been working together, for a couple of years now?
I think it's been a couple of years.
Yeah.
It's been a good long
hundreds of hours.
It's been a lot. You have been a very loyal customer, ma'am.
Sometimes I am very needy.
You
and I write her these long, like, hey, I haven't been feeling well lately, and the dog just and I'm having this thing with the pattern, and then she gets back and she's like, I'm sorry you're going through all this, because I'm just a verbal, like,
you are fine. I'm
who I am. Like, I'm 63. I have hour-long podcasts every 2 weeks, and I edit a lot, and people know. Like, if people don't love me because I talk too much, they're not here.
Right? You're gonna find your people.
I'm an ultra extrovert, and I've always been this way. I am, it's how I communicate with the world, is just through lots and lots of words. And so, but I really appreciate the relationship that we have built, even though we're not face to face a lot. I know in like that when I send you an email, I'm going to get a response. That has not always been the case. I know that when you tech edit my pattern, that it's going to hit all the high points. That has not always been the case, right? I feel more confident that my patterns are going out into the world well edited and test knit now, and that takes some of the stress away. So I want to thank you for that. I think I thank you often. I think I
do. I feel appreciated. I love working with you. So
it's me again.
No. It makes a difference. First off, you are always appreciative. You send me things that I ask for. Like if I say I need this, you send me what I need. And also the fact that we can go back and forth and we can figure out what's best for you and best for your patterns, but that that you're willing to make adjustments and stuff.
Absolutely. I kind of feel like in my head there's this little voice that says, Karina says.
Okay, I like that though. That makes me happy.
No, for sure. Like Karina would say, get this done, right? Or whatever. So, okay, we don't have to keep going here. I don't want to take any more of your time. I think we're getting close to at our time slot here.
I love this.
But yeah, okay, everybody go over and look at Ravelry. Look at all of Karina's patterns. I will have a podcast, Patreon podcast that I do at the front of this for my Patreon people. And then this part goes up on for everyone on YouTube, for all my subscribers, and they can go and look at your website. They can look at all your designs, buy some of our patterns, because we all need people to collect as many patterns as you do yarn. That's the key for we designers, is that we need you to have as many patterns in your queue as you have yarn.
That's a good way to think about it.
That would help us. Our patterns are cheaper than your skeins of yarn.
This is true. This is very true.
No, I'm really thankful that you were here today. It was good to see you again and chat. Right now we're working on a couple of different design things that are coming out shortly. The Chevy hat pattern, which I've talked about before, with the chevrons and the little dog tag, that is finishing up with testers. And the Striped Dream sweater has another month of testing. But a couple people have finished. It's turning out darling. I have completely finished mine. I'm just gonna go like this. I just steamed it this morning. So I finished my short sleeved one, and I had to stop on the long sleeved one because I have to try it on to see how long I want my sleeves to be, because I want to be able to wear it at Rhinebeck. You're not going, are you? Are you going to Rhinebeck?
I don't have plans to go to Rhinebeck at this point. I was actually talking to some friends of mine, because some of the newer people in co-working actually live in that area. And I was like, oh, if we went to Rhinebeck, and it's a little late to be looking for a house at this point. But
well, we didn't get ours until a month or so ago, and there were still a number available. So you could.
Well, I may take
it's
a
hard
look
to
at
do
it.
it last minute though.
It is hard to do it last minute. I may take a look. Well, the nice thing is the flights from here to New York are usually pretty cheap. But I may. But if I don't do it this year, I'm definitely planning on next year because it's been a few years since I've been up and I really enjoy that. So, but yeah, so you're gonna wear it at Rhinebeck? That's awesome.
Yes, I'm going to wear it on Friday because on Saturday, you probably don't know this, but the Madison, Wisconsin Knitters Guild is taking a bus to Rhinebeck.
Oh,
And they
neat.
have 50 some people going on this bus, I think. And they chose my Pretty Boxes sweater to knit as a group. And they're all going to wear it at Rhinebeck. And I am going to be
Oh,
able to get a picture of my sweater from last year, the Pretty Boxes, with this giant group of people who chose to knit my pattern.
Corey, that's amazing.
I
I
mean, there
cannot
are going
wait
to
to
be
see.
like 40 or more Pretty Boxes sweaters walking around at Rhinebeck this year.
That's
Yeah.
fabulous.
I
That's
know.
fabulous.
I've never had that. Like I was like,
Wonderful.
woo! Okay. I will say goodbye to everyone. Thanks so much, Karina. This was
You're
lovely.
welcome. This was great.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.